There we go. Now it's counting up, so we're good. Hey, everybody, welcome to the Sustainiacs, or welcome back to the Sustainiacs. I'm Mike Vincent. I'm always the Sustainiac. This week, the other one is my soon-to-be new best friend, because Alex Cohen, he is Vice President of Sustainability at the Governance and Accountability Institute, or just Governance and Accountability Institute Incorporated, G&A Incorporated. Alex, how are you, my friend?
Oh, doing good. How about you?
I'm doing fantastic. I'm having a great day. We had a little bit of technical difficulty starting up, but we both have fun with that type of stuff. But hey, where you're in New York? Or you're in Queens, right?
I'm in Queens.
So you're living next to what stadium is it?
The Forest Hills Stadium.
The Forest Hills Stadium.
They
Okay.
it's where they used to do the U.S. Open before it moved to its current spot.
Oh,
And
really? Okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
these days it's used for music shows, events. So we've got Neil Young performing tonight.
Fantastic.
So
Are you going to go?
I actually hear it. I'm next door. I hear it clearly from my living room.
Oh,
So
you don't need to go. You get all of it from your living room.
exactly, just open a window and I get a free show.
Okay, so if you don't actually buy into the show and it's just like invading your personal space, is it considered a bootleg copy if you just record it and sell it on the streets?
I don't think it's quite that good. I wouldn't pay for
Oh,
it, but it
I
is one
got you.
of the little benefits of living where I do is I get every summer I get free live music. I love it.
Really?
Oh, it's
Wow.
great.
Taylor Swift performed there or no?
Oh, I think she might be a little bit too big. This place only seats 15,000.
Oh, okay. Yeah, all right. I got you. Yeah, so yeah. Neil Young's not filling up stadiums like Taylor Swift is she?
No, I don't think Taylor Swift's getting out of bed for just 15,000.
No, no, not even euros. I don't think. So, anyway, Alex, let's get into what you're doing there and how you got into it. Give us a brief background, a little bit of what's going on at the G&A Institute, first of all, and what you guys do, and we'll dig in completely into that. I've got some things pulled up here, but how you got into it as well. But go ahead. What is the G&A Institute, and why should we care?
Yeah, so G&A helps companies with to advance their sustainability journey. We operate at the intersection of capital markets and sustainability. So
Ah.
we work to understand, from the investor perspective, what is it that companies need to do to, attract ESG focused investors. To disclose, we also work with companies as they're, trying to understand what the requirements are and how to put these activities into practice. So this means that we do everything from create annual sustainability reports, do materiality assessments. These days, and I'm sure we'll get into this more with emerging regulations in Europe, double materiality assessments. We also help with, responding to surveys like CDP, CSA, ESG policy development, greenhouse gas inventories, setting climate-based targets, responding to investor data inquiries. Essentially, it's a pretty broad array of sustainability and ESG consulting services, investor relations, communications, and design. I'd say those are probably the three big buckets.
Yeah, and so most people are just starting to hear that. This is really really interesting stuff because what you're in that space where it's something that the companies have to do, even if they're not a sustainable company, like they're not in the business of sustainability, right? They're kind of being forced into having this is a value add almost type of thing that's outside their core competency, right? And so you assist kind of with how to manage that from an investor relations type of thing, but also it sounds like you're hitting into the really marketing and defense type of stuff, right? When you're talking about, I mean, defending against greenwashing, that type of stuff is what I
Mhm.
mean by defense. Not like we need green missiles or anything like that shooting around.
No, but if
Is
we
that
could clean up the fuel sources for the missiles, but that's a whole other topic of conversation.
I'm
But
much less worried about the carbon impact of the missiles than like the immediate, you know, spontaneous oxidation that happens at the other end.
But no, you are right about what we do. This is and this is something that we're finding. It like you said, there is a bit of a pull here that this is something that companies are increasingly feeling like they must do.
Right.
For their many of their stakeholders are concerned about this. Their investors, their employees, customers. But for many companies, this is not, like you said, not their core competence. And so that's where we come in, is to provide that guidance and support and consulting services to understand what the requirements are, how to navigate the disclosure landscape, what needs to be said. Crucially, when it comes to, for example, materiality, what are the topics that a company needs to focus on? What is material to the business, to your investors, to your stakeholders, that the company should disclose on, should have programs for, should be tracking key performance indicators on.
Yeah. I feel like a kid in a candy store because there's so many different avenues that we could go down with this, right? I want to ask 15 questions all at the exact same time and just have you spew out. One of the things that really interests me the most is I'm in the sustainability, obviously the Sustainiacs, but I have a company that I run as well that recycles plastics and does so for industry and helping them participate more in consumers as well. And what I run into is that there's companies that want to do it and will do it, but they're not going to do it until they have to because they can get in trouble. So I guess my first real question to you is how is that playing out in what you see? And it seems like a really bad strategy to me. Would you agree that you need to get in front of it? And how urgent is that really, in your opinion, for companies to say, I need to get ahead of this?
So I agree. I feel like what we're seeing right now is a real evolution in the industry, in the entire sustainability field, where traditionally this has been the Wild West of disclosure. And I'll
Right.
just focus these comments on disclosure specifically. But it's really been a wild west in terms of what companies disclosed, what they chose to disclose, how thorough their disclosure was, because all of the frameworks that have been used, the Global Reporting Initiative, the Sustainable Accounting Standards Board, the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, these were the big three, and they're all voluntary.
Yeah.
So, this has been a real issue, is, getting high quality data, getting comparable data. But to answer your question, we're seeing a real evolution the last couple of years, really led by the EU. And their corporate sustainability disclosure directive, reporting directive, the CSRD. And this is a huge step change in the field in terms of the information that needs to be disclosed, the quality of that information, needing to get it assured. And so this is something that I think a lot, and crucially, it's extraterritorial, which
Mm,
means that if you're a U.S. company with exposure to the EU, you're going to be caught up in this. And
yeah.
that's really changing the game from a nice to have when it comes to disclosure to a must do, on par with financial regulation and disclosure.
Right. Right. And when you say that it's extraterritorial, when even if you're not like doing that business you just do business with businesses that do business in Europe, you're there, right? I always scope three doesn't mean it's less. Scope three is just a definition of what it is, right? And so if you're somebody scope three, that's just as important as being one of their scope ones. It's just a definition of how to report that specific emissions or carbon footprint, right?
Hmm. So yes, although but the point to remember is that the CSRD is much broader than climate.
Yeah.
It
No, I get that. I was just using it as kind of a for instance.
But yes, and so there are specific requirements related to size, number of employees, number of assets, amount of turnover, of that a U.S. company has to have in the EU before they're actually exposed
Oh,
to
okay.
this. Um, That said, there are so many of these laws and regulations that are now popping up around the globe that it's almost inevitable that companies are going to be caught up in it.
Mm, mm,
Here in
mm.
the U.S., for example, the SEC just approved a rule which is currently stayed pending legal challenges related to climate disclosure. But we also
Mm.
see, California has passed a similar law mandating scope
What?
1, 2, and 3 disclosure.
What? California passed a sustainability law?
I know it's shocking,
It
but
is breaking news,
um,
right?
this is another one that you don't have to be based in California. Essentially,
Yeah,
if
no,
you
you
have,
don't. Right.
you got an employee in California, you have sales in California. They're capturing companies like that.
Now you're
Uh,
talking about the one that's like if you offer involuntary or voluntary information on your sustainability, you have to be able to prove it, right? Like either through your website. That whole thing that I read through and was like incredibly confused as to what it really means, right?
so the issue with the California laws is that the regulations for how we're going to implement them are still being developed. So I
Yeah.
think there's still a ton of confusion out there about what the exact process is, what the thresholds are going to be, and we're still seeing what CARB, the California regulator, is going to be developing. But that's just one example here. There's other
Yeah.
states that are looking at writing the same laws. Like here in New York, they're thinking about doing the same thing. Um,
Yeah, it's Europe, West Coast, East Coast, and then it gravitates towards the middle of the United States. Kind of how things go, right? And especially in this type of this vertical, in the sustainability vertical.
it has
So
tended that way.
it has. So, are you assisting people with those legal understanding those legal ramifications and what they need to do? This is what. So, if somebody's doing business in California right now, or Europe, et cetera, you're going to help them try and navigate through that and not break laws. Hopefully,
Right. And developing the high quality disclosure that is capable of being assured. But this is what I mean by the industry is changing radically from an era of voluntary disclosure, where claims of greenwashing were all too valid, to one of regulation and obligation and assurance. And this is this really steps up the game in terms of what companies are expected to do, what the amount of effort and time that needs to go into this disclosure work. And
yeah. So we're seeing this changeover, like you're saying, this evolution, right? And that's a good one. It's not a revolution. It's certainly an evolution, and this whole topic is evolving from I'm going to put out these claims of sustainability, whether they're nefarious or they were, for good reason. They thought they were doing the right thing. They just got caught not doing the right thing, whichever it is. I'm not going to pass judgment on that type of stuff. But it's changing from this, if I'm sustainable, I can sell more of my mugs than the other guy, to if I want to sell any mugs at all, I have to get to and that's kind of defining or helping to solidify and make clearer laws, should it not?
Yes, absolutely. And I think one of the big holdups so far has been this lack of consistent laws.
Yeah,
And a common complaint that we hear from clients is just tell us what needs to be done and we'll do it.
right.
But it's felt like there's like I said, it's been voluntary, so it hasn't really been clear what needs to be done. A real benefit here is, yeah, we're now establishing what the floor is, what the baseline is for sustainability practices. Because we haven't even gotten into ISSB and the work of transcribing that into national legislation around the world.
Mm, mm.
But that is, in theory, supposed to unify everything. The one ring, if you will.
The one ring, I love it. The one ring to rule them all. Uh, and when you talk about this evolution, so the one thing that I did that I was starting to dig into pretty deeply, actually, but I guess it's like 5 months past or something like that since you posted, because this is the 2023 report. Tell us about that report, of, I guess it's really a report or research on the voluntary and the reporting of different size cap companies and what they're doing in sustainability, right? And there's some things in there that I'm not a finance guy, but they look pretty darn important as far as what those are, as far as the changes and the increases of what companies are actually starting to report more and more. And why is that important? One, for I mean, you get why it's important for the environment if they're actually doing these things, but does it have impact in furthering legislation around the world, international or domestically, depending on where you're at, and how um, I guess effective or efficient that legislation is? Because don't you find in this wild west we can have some legislation that comes out that actually has some pretty severe unintended impacts? I guess I asked about 40 questions right there, so hopefully you kept them all together.
So let me let me start by talking about our research sustainability reporting trends. This
Yeah,
is our flagship research product that we put out every year, where we
yeah,
analyze these days the top 1,000, so the companies in the Russell 1,000.
right.
We and their disclosure practices. We used to only look at the S&P 500, but these days it's 98% of S&P 500 companies are putting out an annual sustainability report. So it's effectively universal.
Yeah,
And so a couple of years ago, we expanded that to look at the next 500 largest companies. And we have seen, I think when we first published this, it was a handful a few years ago. And we're already up to 82% of that smaller group of the Russell 1000
yeah. It
are
was like at 21, it was like 68%, and you added another third on top of that to 82% in 1 year.
exactly, and this really speaks to, like you were saying, the mainstreaming of sustainability disclosure. And with that mainstreaming, we have seen that there's a lot more willingness from regulators and governments to step in and say, if you're doing this anyway, we should regulate it. And this is one of the things that we saw with like the SEC
Yeah.
rule, is that they did cite our research in their rulemaking, to say, look, everyone's already doing this. We're not imposing some radical new requirement. We're just bringing a bit of rigor to what's already being done. Uh,
And is that to protect? The SEC would get involved to do that, to protect and to understand the information it's giving out of there, so it's not misleading to the investment community. Is that would be their motivation?
exactly. This is to maintain the integrity of capital markets. That is the SEC's number one rule.
Right.
And
Yeah.
fundamentally, if you don't have decent, comparable, high quality information, then we're all just guessing.
Yeah.
So this is the power of the SEC and, well, of the government in general, is that it can impose a sort of uniform standard. So we can look at reports from different companies, different industries, and you can actually trust when you see climate data that it's accurate, that it makes sense, that it's comparable to what other companies are doing.
Okay. So that statement opens up another thing. I know, shocking, another door in my mind, another rabbit hole. If now this reporting, et cetera, is getting some, as you put, is getting a little more rigor, a little more structure behind it, et cetera, does that imply that we should be having more accurate data now? And does that imply that maybe some of the things we understood about, uh, you know, the numbers and sustainability and the environment, et cetera, should be a bit different now that it's a bit more accurate or more full of a database? Does that imply that or no?
So it in that these calculation methodologies are still improving every year.
Yeah.
So 2023 disclosure is going to be better than 2022, which was better than 2021, and so on and
Right.
so forth. So in that way, it's not that you shouldn't trust the data from previous years, it's that you should trust the more recent data more.
Gotcha.
And as a
Yeah.
rule in life, if something is assured, I trust it more than something that wasn't.
Wait a minute. Do
Uh,
you have a law degree? I got to go look back in your background because that sounded like a lawyer speak to me a little bit.
I
Although I agree with it accurately.
uh, I do not. I simply appreciate the evolution of the field.
I get you.
Um, and
Fantastic.
I admit I'm an optimistic person, so my attitude is, things should get better with time. And
like a fine wine, right?
exactly, or
Absolutely.
climate change disclosure.
Yeah, they're one and the same, really. They're
Exactly.
I love it. I love it. So, is it now? Are there certain are there certain reporting requirements that are coming to fruition right now? New laws in the United States, and does that impact? Does that have anything to do with ESG type of, or not ESG, but extended producers responsible EPR type of regulations, et cetera? Do those have any impact on this whatsoever, or does this have any impact and influence on that? Is there any connection there between those?
So loosely. In
Okay,
terms of laws that we're seeing in the US, it's mostly focused on climate specifically.
gotcha.
There's other things like the SEC's Regulation SK dealing with some other non-business matters,
Yeah.
but that's still in the works. They did just put out some enhanced disclosure requirements around cybersecurity issues. So we are seeing, a slow expansion of reporting requirements for public companies. Things like extended producer responsibility here in the U.S. This has been pretty much entirely a state level
Yes.
thing. I know Connecticut, for example, a couple years ago passed some laws related to extended producer responsibility. But in general, like this sort of like circularity discussion I don't feel has really penetrated the U.S. yet in the way
No, it
that
hasn't.
I feel like this is certainly a place where the EU is well ahead of us in terms of the discussion, trying to develop some rules around this, preventing greenwashing with making circularity claims. But this is we're still the voluntary stage here.
Yes. Yeah. No, we very much are. Okay. I wasn't trying to see if there was any correlation there, or any impact, but it's still far behind. And I agree with you that we definitely are. This is, and because this is a security and exchange type of thing, that's why this is going federal and not state, because there aren't state level authorities that have any power like the SEC does, right? I mean, this is a federal thing. It's not a state local thing, and therefore the evolution comes faster. Is that a fair statement to make?
So, I mean, there are state level. This is something that being in New York, as you can imagine, I'm sensitive to, or more
Sure.
aware of, I should say. But there are certainly state level banking regulators
Right.
who have some of whom have taken different attitudes about sustainability disclosure. But you really need the SEC to impose uniform rules because otherwise you just end up with a patchwork, and that's a mess to operate in.
Well, how is that interplay between that and the politically driven legislation and state legislation that we see going back and forth, right? Like specific funds, public funds can't invest in green or sustainable companies, et cetera, in Texas, or if they have a specific unacceptable view of fossil fuels, then public funds aren't allowed to be invested in them. How does that impact or play with this?
Um, that is so I mean, we are certainly seeing.
Or were we supposed to not talk about that today?
Uh, no, I was trying to look something up because
Okay.
I thought I had just read something. To your point, what we're seeing is basically some states are radically diverging
Yeah, of
when it comes to
course.
sustainability, and some of them, like California is a leader, but New York, Massachusetts, Illinois are looking at similar laws to California, and then at the other end of the spectrum. Yeah, you've got states like Texas or Oklahoma who are prohibiting anything to do anything even to invest in ESG.
Yeah.
Uh,
And then you got like Wyoming that is like outlawing EVs and stuffing wind turbines into old coal mines. which for some reason isn't landfill. I don't understand. I think that is the definition of landfill, but
But my understanding is that these laws are not delivering. The issue is, if what these laws are basically saying in these states is we want less information to make decisions about our investments. And I don't think any
right,
investor has ever benefited from having less information. If and so we one of the things that we're seeing now is some of these states are looking at these laws and thinking we're losing money here. So there is currently an effort, for example, in Oklahoma to, at the very least, amend the changes that they've made to prohibit, ESG investment, because this is, ultimately, state pension funds, they want to, their job is to get the best return on
right.
investment.
Regardless
And
of what that company's doing, as long as it's legal.
and when politicians start telling experts, you can't look at information that's relevant to make a decision, you're going to get less good decision making. This is just, inevitable.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. It costs taxpayers. I mean, I've read reports of estimates of taxpayers, costing taxpayers X number of dollars in certain states where, they have these restrictions on the investment of public funds into these type of companies as well. I mean, I can't remember the exact numbers and I don't want to say any and mislead, but is that something you've read as well? Is that fairly true? I mean, that's what you're implying right now. You're making poorer decisions because you're basically saying, I would like less information, please.
Yes, exactly. I don't have the specific numbers, but yes, this is certainly what we're seeing.
Yeah. So how in your estimation, how urgent is it for companies to get on board and do this, and how I guess let's just start there. How urgent is it for companies to go? Wait a minute, I'm not talking to Alex. I need to get something, whether it's with you or not. Obviously, I'd like everybody to call Alex and blow up his phone, and he won't be able to listen to. Well, wait till after the concert tonight because Neil Young's pretty good. I like Neil Young, but how urgent is for them to get on the ball and start investigating this?
Uh, Depends on where they're based. So
Yeah,
if you're exposed to the EU, this year,
yeah,
uh, because reporting requirements start next year. For U.S. based, speaking for U.S. based companies,
yeah.
they're going to have to start reporting in 2029 on 2028 data, but the rules are phased in over stages over the next coming years. California is going to be requiring disclosure starting at the end of next year. So companies will need to have submitted their climate risk assessment by December 31st, 2025.
By December 31st, 2020. So
So
you got to start putting together the infrastructure now to be able to get that together, right? I mean, this isn't just a
exactly,
like, hey, I'd like to do it, so we just flip this switch, right? There's a lot of integration, and et cetera, that has to happen, right?
exactly. Uh,
And just
so
and just reporting it isn't good enough. Is reporting it good enough, or do you have to meet certain standards yet, or is that still down the line?
so they are using the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures framework, the TCFD. And that's a whole other conversation with what the fact that the TCFD has been disbanded and integrated into the International Sustainability Standards Board, the ISSB, and their old framework is now the ISSB S2, which is basically an updated and enhanced version of TCFD. So, long story short, yes, there are external frameworks that you need to use and you need to meet to satisfy these requirements. They are, those are still being built out. But the other thing we're seeing is if companies have any sort of international operations, is the ISSB is being the idea. Let me take a quick step back. The
Yeah,
purpose of the ISSB was to unify all of these different frameworks and standards. So it's absorbed, most importantly, SASB and TCFD, but there's others as well. with the idea that countries will take the ISSB standards and write them into national legislation.
Okay.
So if you're, if you're of Canadian operations, for example, you're going to be exposed to the CSSD. Um, uh, yep.
Yeah.
So, and that is, they're still in the consultation phase, but this is coming the next year or two. Similar in Singapore, Japan, even China's writing these sorts of regulations. So we're seeing, over the next 3 to 5 years, if you have operations pretty much anywhere outside the U.S., you're going to have to be disclosing on a lot of ESG information. And even in the US, you're going to have to report on a lot of climate information. At least if you
And
want
when
to
you
keep,
say ESG, you're going through the full environmental, social, and governance. I mean, it's
yes,
not, we're not just talking about climate related like emissions or scope threes or anything silly like that. We're talking
right,
the whole full scope of ESG.
right. And this is where we're really seeing a divergence between the US and the rest of the world.
Yeah.
Because the EU with the CSRD, with much of the rest of the world in ISSB, it's a focus on all three branches, the E, S, and G. The
Yeah.
US has been really narrowly focused on climate issues. And it's this is something that we're seeing. Our hope is that we'll start to catch up with what everyone else is doing, but and start to expand that. But for the moment, that's been the breakdown that we've seen in terms of regulation.
Yeah. I mean, we hope we'll catch up. Some are probably hoping the other ones will just stop. And are they going to start repurposing some of the acronyms soon? Or, I mean,
It it does sometimes feel like we're about to run out, but
no, there's no shortage. It's unbelievable. I think there's people that just sit around and think of those type of things. So, but that'd be kind of interesting. Um, yeah. So as we move forward with this, I see how difficult that you really have to have somebody in there and kind of like you, for lack of a better word, consult with you to find out just exactly where you're exposed and which one of these different acronyms you're gonna need to deal with,
mhm,
and through a time frame as well, right? So they're all at different levels of development. They're all at different stages and different time frames of being implemented and or carrying with them fines or whatever it happens to be. And some of them are climate related, and some of them are ESG, which is the full bank related. This gets confusing really, really fast, and especially if I were to consider a the internal workings or the strategizing, the strategery of a multinational company, even just two nations, the growth. This is a huge strategic framework you've got to lay out just for international growth. If even if you're just domestic and you plan on going international in the next anytime soon, you've got to start figuring this out now, and it's going to really kind of impact your go to market strategy in the international community, right?
oh, absolutely. And we're just scratching the surface here with all the different regulations and requirements. Because we're not getting into like the CS triple D in the EU, or any of the EU taxonomy, or any of these other things that are also applicable to companies. But yes, this is something that's changing rapidly, and especially if you want to operate in the world's largest economies, the EU in particular, but also California. These are just the rules for doing business these days. Is you have to be disclosing on this, and it's a huge lift.
Does our political climate and attitude towards sustainability, ESG in general, and how it fluctuates in our society, it specifically North America, or specifically the U.S., is it a detriment to our economic dealings throughout the world? In other words, are we doing a disservice to our own private enterprise by not jumping on board faster and getting them trained up, so to speak?
So yes. I think so. In part because the one of the things the EU wrote into the CSRD is that they will accept equivalent standards. So if your home country has standards that the EU considers meeting the CSRD requirements, you don't have to use the CSRD.
Mm.
And the ISSB qualifies. So if you're a Canadian company, if you're a Japanese company, if you're in Singapore, you're just by following your national laws, you're all set to operate in the EU. The US, by not having an equivalent national standard, is sort of forcing its companies to adopt a legal framework that wasn't really meant for them.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, it starts. The other part of it, I mean, it's. I don't want to get political in this, but it's important to understand the reaction of the population to this because it really does impact all of this, right? Because you've got the climate change deniers, and you've got the ultra conservative side that just wants to keep drilling more oil and doing all this kind of stuff, and not that those may not have anything to do with this, or some of those philosophies or ideations may not have anything to do with this, but they certainly influence the way you react to other things, right?
Hmm.
And the fact that we can sway from this direction to that direction every fourth November has got to be a detriment to us dealing with these things, right? And do you see this election year as being one? It would seem to me it would be as one that is really stalling progression on these type of issues.
It's been both positive and negative. On
Yeah,
the positive side, the Biden administration is currently rushing out new rules and regulations ahead of the election.
right.
So that part's been nice. There's been some great stuff we've been seeing lately, encouraging EV adoption, raising fuel economy standards, building out charging infrastructure. There was just something last week on a new grid transmission rules, new rules for building federal buildings to be more energy efficient and not use gas anymore.
Mm,
So that part has been nice to see this environmental agenda from the administration, really taking off right now and
hmm.
really getting done. Um, but on the other hand, it is obviously a risk that the other guy could win. But honestly, in 4 years of trying when he was in power, he didn't really accomplish anything when it came to stopping ESG
Yeah,
and this
yeah,
spread.
right.
And I think that's because this, in the U.S., this isn't being driven by government. This to get back to the how we started off the conversation. In the U.S., this is being driven by investors, by employees. And so it's
Yeah,
these stakeholders that are really pushing this. And
yeah.
regardless of who's in the White House, the big investors are not going to be changing their attitude. Because they need high quality sustainability information to be able to, make their investments.
The way I look at it as well is and I agree with everything you just said. I see it as we talk about disrupt or be disrupted and all this thing, and that was a heavy buzzword, especially in my space in the logistics space since probably 2015, right? Or maybe earlier, but it really started to explode between 15 and 20. And then obviously COVID disrupted everything. But as far as technological advances and even blockchain is going to solve everything in logistics, and people just oh, I've got data, I need blockchain therefore, and that type of stuff. But does this not offer an opportunity to create whole new blue oceans of economic advancement and also a more a better disbursement of energy between the haves and have-nots throughout the world?
Oh,
Aren't those
absolutely.
very real opportunities that we're sitting in front of right now?
Oh, absolutely. Climate change, I think, sucks up all the oxygen in the room.
Yeah,
When it comes to conversation, when it comes to regulation here, but the environmental piece covers much more than just the climate. a
Yeah.
biodiversity, water, circularity, waste. These are all vital aspects depending on the business.
Yeah.
And so these are areas that, honestly, even if we were to solve climate change tomorrow and just cut our emissions to zero, we
Yeah.
would still have, huge environmental problems to be solved. Like you were talking about, the fact that our current economy is built around extracting, using, and throwing
Yeah.
away is, given the scale of our economy and our society, no longer sustainable,
Right.
and probably hasn't been for decades. But you're right. We need, and there's a huge amount of opportunity here. This is not about doing less. This is about doing things differently,
Yes.
and
Yes.
rebuilding our entire energy infrastructure, rebuilding our the structure of our economy from linear to circular. uh this is the struggle of our lifetimes, and it's going to take us decades to get this stuff right.
Right. Well, I mean, you look at things that have already been developed or already patented or already designed or discovered or whatever, invented, they have to be reinvented.
Hmm.
And isn't that just open up a huge opportunity for economic growth? And isn't all of those things that we were taught in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s about, the Malcolm Baldrige Award and total quality management and ISO 9000 and all these different and lean management, Six Sigma, all this kind of stuff. Is this not pretty much the exact same thing? I mean, if you're going through your business and you're really trying to make it sustainable, to make it green, you're going through all the practice and reporting to what you're doing there. Isn't that all of the same processes and efforts? And actually, the end goals are the same as all those other things I just mentioned. I mean, if you're getting rid of waste and inefficiencies and exhaust and all this other type of thing, isn't that a goal anyways of creating an efficient business?
I mean, I think so.
Yeah. Right.
And yeah, I feel like this is definitely something that's getting more mainstream these
Yeah.
days. I feel like circularity was barely a concept even 5 years ago.
Sure.
And these days, it's much more of a prominent of an issue, of a concern. In biodiversity, we're seeing the another acronym for you, the TNFD, uh, the Task Force on Nature-related Financial
I'm just going to
Disclosures.
be an acronym consultant.
Honestly, it's a fun party trick to be able to talk about how the NFRD has been replaced by the CSRD, which uses EFRAG to develop the ESRS, which will be reported. Anyway, yeah,
I
this
feel like I'm
is.
in an SNL skit. How about that?
Every once in a while, it feels like I'm doing incantations. Um, uh, but a point is, and we just saw this with the UN 2 years ago, I think, recently. The member states approved a similar treaty to the Paris Accord related to biodiversity. An important part of which is, how can we better use nature? How can we better, how can we waste less? Have less of an impact on the natural world. So I feel like the topic of biodiversity and circularity is where climate change was 5-10 years ago, and
Okay.
where I think we're starting to see some serious action against climate change. Latest projections I'm seeing is we've gone in the last decade from 4C of predicted warming this century to about 2.5. So
Yeah.
we're tackling it, and
That helps. That
yes,
helps.
and trend lines are good, and I feel like
So
biodiversity.
no, go ahead. Go ahead. Finish your
I was
thought.
just going to say, I feel like biodiversity is in a similar position now, where we're just starting to get serious about, even what do we measure here, much less how do we start to, get things moving in a positive direction.
Gotcha. Let me ask you this: is it and yeah, media and marketing, et cetera, are not the sexiest things to invest in, right? Your multiples and your returns are not exactly as great as SaaS or high tech and nascent technologies, that type of thing. Although the risks are higher, therefore the rewards are higher in some of those. But what how do I ask what responsibility in your world, in your investment and world and stakeholder world, what responsibility does marketing play with all this, as far as creating that value, or I don't know how else to say it, but re-educating the consumer into what is important and what isn't important as we move forward. Your thoughts on that, or just say, looks at it, and next question, whatever.
Um, Never met a question I want to take a stab at answering. Um, no, I would say that there's, the key role for marketing is how do you translate, all of the acronyms I've been running through, and
Yeah,
all the requirements into, simple English, plain language that if you're not a sustainability consultant, you follow. Because I
I
think
see.
that's one of the real issues with our field is, there's a lot of good stuff, there's a lot of good frameworks, there's a lot of good progress, but I'm not sure how much this translates to the general public,
Yeah. Well,
because
it does in this way. I'd like to let me put forth this point to that. It When you start hearing acronyms and you start hearing regulations and you start hearing reporting and you start hearing acronyms you understand, like SEC and the EU and that type of thing, the at least semi-educated public thinks business regulation, economic downturn, limited growth, anti-business, pro environment, anti-business. Let's save the environment, but you're all going to be out of work and starving. How, how do we overcome that? Because that's not the case. That's what we're talking about, right?
right, and you're so right. This is a huge opportunity. This is going to take millions, tens of millions of people, which means a lot of jobs to
Yeah.
actually do the transition.
Right.
And this I don't think, not a marketer, but I don't think this has been communicated. I feel like, this conversation gets so hijacked in the popular imagination,
Right.
by people who don't believe in growth, people who want to, revert back, who want to, essentially blow up the industrial economy. And there's this group I don't think represents the future, but they sure are loud.
Yes.
And it's a constant challenge to try to overcome that and talk about how, we're not going backward, we just want to move forward in a different direction, toward a world that's cleaner, that's more renewable, that's more circular, and building all of that.
Yeah, you're exactly. And one of the arguments I put forth, it's not incredibly intelligent, but it also is effective because a lot of it is surface reaction to things, to headline porn, if you will, and stuff like that. It's just, listen, whether you believe or don't believe in climate change, or you think sustainability is just a hoax for people to make money, uh, why don't you jump on the hoax and make some money? And two, isn't it just better to not pollute the hell out of the environment? Isn't that just better on its own,
Right. Worst
regardless?
case scenario, we have cleaner air and water.
Yeah, exactly. That's the worst, and more jobs and cooler technology, right? I mean, those are the worst outcomes of it, right?
Yep.
Because we're not talking about the government taking from the rich or the poor and spending it on jobs that aren't viable economic. We're talking about investment in viable companies that are going towards green in their non-green industry, or are developing green or sustainable technologies, right? It's both. It's across the board, right?
Yes. Yeah. And and we haven't even really, I don't think, touched on the social aspects of all this either. And the possibilities for inclusion, for worker relations, for
Yes.
discrimination, and but that is probably a whole other can of worms. Uh,
It
other
is,
than
and I'd
the
love to get
environmental
into it.
side.
Yeah, it is, and I'd love to get into it maybe on the next episode. We're 50 minutes in today, and it's been fantastic. But yeah, I'd like to get into that with you again. We'll have you back, and we'll do it again if you'll be here, and
Sounds great.
hopefully not during a concert. But hey, if it is, that's all right. We can have background music. That's fine.
Oh,
We'll just pick a good
it's
one.
that sounds great. Yeah, we've got shows
What's
through
this?
November, so
Yeah, what? Yeah, well, I'll just consult your concert schedule, and we'll schedule a recording according to that schedule and make it happen. Right?
perfect.
There's some good bands that only play 15,000 seat arenas now, right? I mean,
Oh yeah, we've got some good ones. I think last year one of the highlights was Dave Matthews Band.
oh, nice,
We had
nice.
a Fallout Boy, a band that I used to like when I was in college, and then I realized I didn't know any of their modern music when they actually performed. So that was a fun
Nice.
revelation.
Yeah, yeah, that's always it always makes you feel real young
Hmm.
when that stuff happens. It's fantastic. Yeah, because I want to get into like even deeper into the ability to redistribute and through a developmental means. You know, I mean, when we discovered oil, we had or and started to develop the petroleum industry, we had an opportunity to include and spread and bring up the all boats with that rising tide, but we didn't, right? And now we're going through a whole nother transition of finding green energy and sustainability, et cetera. And we have that opportunity again in front of us
Hmm.
to do it again. And I'm not saying that I don't see that we will or are, but I'm not 100% confident. You're more positive than I am. Maybe you see that door is still open. Hopefully it is.
I think it's still open in that, we're going to be developing the resources that we need for the next 30 years. We're going to need to dig out an incredible amount of lithium, of cobalt, of silver, that are, going
Yeah.
to be going into these things. And so that's going to be a ton of projects that haven't historically, in land that hasn't historically been mined. This is just
Yeah.
one example. There's others, but so we certainly have that opportunity, and now is the time to be building those processes, so that we don't a second time screw over the native communities, the locals
Yes.
who are going to be negatively impacted
Yes.
by this.
Fantastic. I love it. And one of the other new mining operations will be in landfills.
Oh yeah, a lot of
Those will
good
be
stuff in there.
Oh yeah, those will be the new mines of the future for raw materials. Are bringing those things up. It's been excellent, Alex. Any last thought? And where do people go? And who should be calling you or reaching out to you to get help with all these acronyms that you're spewing out all over the place? I've been writing them down furiously. I'm going to do some fact checking to make sure you weren't just making them up. By the way.
Just the two. Um, no, so Governance and Accountability Institute. Like I said, we help corporates and investors to navigate the space. So you can go to our website. We've also got currently running a webinar series on explaining like particularly the CSRD requirements. Uh, just we've got our second one going on. Actually, I think as we're recording this. So, but I think there's another one coming up in a few weeks. So we're, trying to get the word out, trying to help educate people and companies about what these requirements are. But
Fantastic.
yeah, you can just Google Governance and Accountability Institute. I realize it's a
Yeah.
mouthful.
No, I'll be putting out the links as well. Alex, thank you so much, dude. We're gonna schedule you. I mean, seriously, let's just get it on the schedule right away for the next one. Anyways, so this is Alex Cohen part one, and then we'll come back for part two or whatever else you want to call it.
Sounds great.
Fantastic. Peace and love, everybody. We'll catch you next time.